Step back in time to 1940s America, not through textbooks, but through the eyes of those who lived it. What was it truly like to be black during a time of immense social change and rigid racial divides? This is not a tale of statistics or distant policies. This is about children running barefoot through dusty backroads, mothers holding on to dignity in the face of discrimination, and fathers working long shifts while dreaming of a fairer tomorrow. It is about resilience born in the shadows of injustice, about love, laughter, and strength blooming in places where society insisted only sorrow should grow. The 1940s was a decade defined by contradiction. America was rising from the Great Depression and preparing to defend democracy abroad in World War II. The country spoke proudly of freedom, justice, and equality. Yet for black families in the South and beyond, those words often rang hollow. Signs of segregation loomed at every corner, water fountains labeled colored movie theaters with balconies reserved for black viewers, restaurants where no seat would ever be offered. In school books, America was the land of liberty. In real life, it was a land of barriers. And yet, within black homes, churches, and neighborhoods, another story unfolded, a story of unyielding spirit. For a black child growing up in the 1940s, the very act of walking down the street was shaped by invisible rules. You learned early which side of the road to step on when a white family approached. You knew to never look too long into the eyes of a white man in uniform, never forget to say, "Yes, sir," or "No, ma'am." Even if you were older than the person speaking down to you, respect was demanded, but dignity was rarely returned. Still, black parents taught their children a different kind of pride, one that came not from society's recognition, but from an inner knowing of their worth. Imagine the sound of Sunday mornings in a black church in the 1940s, the walls, often made of weathered wood, echoed with hymns that rose like defiance against despair. Gospel choirs filled the air with voices that shook off the weight of the week's injustices. For many, church was not just a place of worship, but a sanctuary of hope. It was where children learned to hold their heads high, where communities strategized about justice, and where dreams of equality found their first breath. But outside those walls, reality was harsh. Schools for black children were underfunded and overcrowded. Old, worn textbooks discarded from white schools were handed down, pages already torn, covers already frayed. Classrooms had few resources, yet teachers poured their very souls into their students, knowing education was a weapon no one could take away. Many of those teachers carried the quiet fire of knowing that a child's brilliance could outshine the darkest of circumstances. In small desks, young black boys and girls scribbled answers, their minds alive with potential, even as society told them their future was already written. The 1940s were also the years of war. Black men enlisted and fought overseas, believing that if they proved their courage in battle, America might finally see them as equals. They wore the same uniforms, saluted the same flag, risked the same lives. But when they returned home, medals on their chests did not shield them from the sting of segregation. Many were forced back into the same limited jobs, the same humiliations, the same reminders that, in the eyes of their country, their sacrifice still wasn't enough. And yet, their presence began to stir something in the hearts of their children, an awareness that change was possible, that dignity could not be denied forever. For young black girls in the 1940s, the lessons of resilience came just as swiftly. They watched their mothers sew clothes late into the night, cooking meals from scraps and stretching pennies into feasts. They saw women balance endless work with grace, keeping families intact under the pressure of a world designed to break them apart. Beauty was often dismissed by society, but within the community, black women set their own standards. Pressed hair, bright dresses, and laughter shared at Saturday socials became quiet rebellions, a declaration that joy, too, belonged to them. Daily life was filled with moments that demanded courage. A black boy walking into town might pass the local diner where white children his age enjoyed milkshakes, knowing he could never step inside. A young girl might dream of becoming a nurse but realize the only hospital she'd ever be welcomed in would be the one for cholerids. Yet, in backyards, children still played tag, marbles clinked against the dirt, and families gathered on porches to sing with the hum of cicadas. They carved out happiness in spaces where none was offered. In northern cities, the story carried its own complications. Many black families had joined the Great Migration, leaving the South in search of better jobs and less hostile environments. But what they found was often segregation by another name. Housing discrimination forced them into crowded neighborhoods. Job opportunities were limited, wages unfair. And yet, the vibrancy of Harlem, Chicago's South Side, and Detroit's black communities became testaments to creativity and culture. Jazz clubs pulsed with life, poets penned words that challenged the world, and black-owned businesses stitched together economic independence against the odds. Every child growing up black in the 1940s carried two truths: the pain of discrimination and the pride of heritage. Family gatherings became lessons in both. Elders told stories of slavery, of Jim Crow laws, of perseverance. Around dinner tables, children learned the names of heroes who were rarely mentioned in white history books: Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth. They also learned about local heroes: the neighbor who stood up to unfair landlords, the teacher who bought extra supplies from her own pocket, the preacher who spoke against injustice even when it was dangerous to do so. It was in those quiet, ordinary moments that extraordinary strength was built. Black childhood in the 1940s was not only a survival of circumstance, it was the planting of seeds. Seeds that would grow into the civil rights movement. Seeds that taught young boys and girls that though they were excluded from many places, they belonged fully to themselves. Seeds that whispered, "You are worthy even when the world says otherwise." Perhaps the most untold truth is this: while racism sought to strip away dignity, it also sharpened resilience. Children learned to move carefully, but they also learned to dream boldly. They were told they were lesser, but their families reminded them of their greatness. That contradiction of oppression and defiance shaped a generation. And from their voices, songs, and stories, a fire was carried forward, one that still burns in America today. To grow up black in the 1940s was to carry the weight of contradiction every single day. You were told to keep your head down, yet you were also told to stand tall. You were expected to accept your place, yet within your home, you were raised to believe in a place far greater than what segregation allowed. This double life between what society demanded and what family instilled shaped not just a childhood, but an entire worldview. For many young black people, the 1940s were years of awakening. The war had forced America to confront its own hypocrisy. How could a nation fight fascism abroad while allowing racial terror at home? Black soldiers had risked their lives in Europe and the Pacific, only to return to neighborhoods still scarred by lynching, still patrolled by laws designed to exclude them from voting, schools, or basic dignity. The contradiction was clear, and children growing up in that era absorbed it deeply. They watched their fathers come home from military service, uniforms pressed, medals gleaming, and yet be denied a fair job. They watched their mothers extend unshakable grace as they navigated a world that dismissed them. Those images imprinted themselves on young minds and became the sparks that would later ignite change. The reality of violence lingered over black communities. Stories of lynchings were whispered in kitchens, sometimes printed in the black press, but ignored in mainstream papers. Children learned, often far too young, that there were towns you did not walk through after sundown, that there were questions you never asked aloud in front of the wrong people. Yet these same children also witnessed their elders' courage, neighbors who refused to be intimidated, families who refused to leave their land despite threats. The lessons were harsh, but they were also empowering. Fear could not erase identity. And while discrimination was unrelenting, black culture in the 1940s blossomed with equal force. Music was a lifeline. The swing and jazz pouring from radios and jukeboxes gave rhythm to days of struggle. Young people danced in community halls, their laughter echoing louder than the prejudice outside. Billie Holiday's haunting voice sang truths about sorrow and survival, while Duke Ellington and Count Basie turned hardship into sound that uplifted spirits. For a young black boy or girl, music became both escape and expression. It said what society refused to hear, that black life was beautiful, worthy, and unbreakable. Education, though limited by segregation, became another battlefield of hope. Parents pushed their children to learn, even when the system fought against them. Many black schools, though underfunded, became hives of excellence because teachers understood their mission went beyond reading and arithmetic. They were raising warriors of the mind. Children were taught that brilliance was their inheritance, not an exception. Some of those children would grow into leaders who changed the course of history. Rosa Parks, Medgar Evers, Maya Angelou, and countless others who carried the memory of 1940s classrooms into the heart of the civil rights movement. In the northern cities, where segregation wasn't enforced by Jim Crow law but by practice, children still knew they were outsiders. Whites-only signs might not hang on every door, but housing deeds, job applications, and subtle exclusions made it clear. And yet, these cities also offered glimpses of possibility. Black newspapers like the Chicago Defender and the Pittsburgh Courier gave voice to community pride. Black-owned shops lined neighborhood streets, barbershops buzzed with conversation, and women's clubs organized to support families in need. For young people, these were lessons in resilience. Even when society closed doors, their community built windows. One of the untold truths of growing up black in the 1940s is that joy was as radical as resistance. To gather for a Sunday dinner of fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread was to affirm family bonds in a world determined to break them. To laugh freely on a summer evening while playing baseball in an empty lot was to claim space where none was offered. To fall in love, to sing, to dream, these were not small things, but acts of defiance. For black children, joy was not given. It was created, and that creation became a foundation of survival. At the same time, whispers of change began to circulate. Some families clipped newspaper articles about lawsuits challenging segregated schools. Others shared stories of activists organizing quietly, risking their safety to demand justice. For the children of the 1940s, these were seeds of awareness. They were raised on both caution and courage, taught to navigate the dangers of racism, while also seeing the possibility of something different. The civil rights movement did not appear overnight in the 1950s and 1960s. It was born in the whispered hopes of the 1940s, nurtured by the resilience of children who were told no, but kept dreaming yes. Imagine being a teenager in 1945, hearing President Truman speak about democracy after the war, and knowing that democracy did not yet reach your street. Imagine being a little girl who wanted to be a teacher, but was told that the best she could do was clean houses. Imagine being a young boy who carried his father's war medal in his pocket, trying to understand why the country that honored bravery abroad punished blackness at home. These were not abstract struggles, they were daily realities. And yet, within those realities, a remarkable generation was forged. The 1940s also offered glimpses of solidarity. Black newspapers promoted the Double V campaign: victory abroad against fascism and victory at home against racism. This message resonated deeply with black youth, who saw their parents' sacrifices and wondered when their country would finally live up to its ideals. Though segregation remained law in many states, cracks began to appear in the system. Court cases were filed, activists grew louder, and children growing up in that time became witnesses to the first stirrings of a revolution. For those who lived it, the memories remain vivid: the feel of chalk dust in a one-room schoolhouse, the sharp sting of being told you can't when you knew you could, the smell of a home-cooked meal after a long day in the fields or factories, the sound of your mother's laughter, soft and strong, carrying hope through thin walls. To grow up black in the 1940s was to carry all of it: pain and pride, sorrow and joy, limitation and boundless imagination. And perhaps this is the heart of the untold story, that a community not only survived, but thrived. Against the odds, black children became dreamers. They dreamed of classrooms without barriers, of buses without back seats, of jobs that paid fairly, of neighborhoods where safety was a right, not a privilege. Those dreams, rooted in the 1940s, would blossom into marches, sit-ins, freedom rides, and speeches that shook the nation. So when we look back on the 1940s, we must see more than oppression. We must see the children who memorized multiplication tables on broken desks and still dared to imagine college. We must see the young girls who helped their mothers iron shirts at dawn and still whispered of becoming doctors. We must see the young boys who picked cotton in fields but practiced speeches in their heads. speeches that would one day demand justice. We must see not just what was denied, but what was created: community, culture, courage. To grow up black in 1940s America was to live inside a paradox of cruelty and beauty. It was to feel the sting of exclusion and the embrace of family. It was to know danger, but also to know the power of faith. It was to witness injustice, but also to carry the quiet certainty that justice was possible. Those children, now elders or ancestors, carried stories that textbooks often overlooked, but that shaped the very soul of America. Their untold stories remind us that dignity is not something granted by laws or withheld by prejudice. It is carried in the heart, passed through generations, and proven by survival. The children of the 1940s proved it every day with every hymn sung, every book read, every smile shared despite the world's attempt to erase it, and so we honor them. The ones who learned to walk carefully but also to dream boldly. The ones who endured discrimination but carried within them an unshakable pride. The ones who grew up black in 1940s America and, in doing so, laid the foundation for a movement that would change the nation forever.